There's a new composition that came from EU that's absolutely sweeping ranked ladder right now. Introducing Vexotech, the new AP Burst Mage composition that's coming out and destroying the meta. By stacking Blue Buff and Gunblade on Vex, you're able to sustain your frontline near infinitely just playing 5 Exotech and not even building into the vertical. It's a very cheap, effective, and fun composition if you love doing the big AoE nukes, and you get to do a lot of true damage to melt enemy frontlines, even if they're rerolling for 3 stars. So for this episode of Into Deep, let's dive into this composition and find out why it's so vexcellent. Vexotech is a comp that really needs best in slot, specifically Blue Buff and Gunblade. If you don't have early components for any of these items, let's say you start off with like bow, glove, and vest, you just really should not think about playing this comp. But if you do have, tier rod, tier sword, or any variation thereof, and you can get these items pretty easily, you should definitely be thinking about this comp. Part of the reason why Gunblade is so important is because of Vex's passive. 15% Omnivamp, but 150% of overhealing from Retribution's damage is converted to bonus true damage to his primary target. So it's really powerful to get overhealing on Vex, which is why Gunblade, which heals the lowest percent health ally for 20% damage output, is really powerful. And for that very reason as well, because it's overhealing, not just healing in general, you also want Vex to not take damage too much in the early parts of the fight. So you want Vex to be in a safe hex, which brings us to our next point, which is positioning. Vex kind of wants to be around this area, but you have some people put her in the corner because she's safer and technically can get more damage. But then the trade-off of putting her in the corner is that when she shoots her shadow, she's hitting less targets, right? You want her to hit a clump of units to AoE. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there that you have to kind of weigh risk and reward. The one thing about this composition, though, is that because it requires you to have specific items, you're often loose streaking to guarantee them off carousel. Otherwise, you might be stuck in a situation where you have to slam Shojin and your performance drops noticeably. For that very reason, augments that give you a blue buff can be really powerful if you get it at 3-2, for example. Blue battery or 1 buff, 2 buff just gives you a blue buff immediately. And if you have extra AP items, you usually throw it on Varus. The order of items that you usually go for are blue buff, Gunblade. Then you start making some frontline items for Mordekaiser and Sejuani. Then you go for a third item on Vex. The reason why Guardbreaker is really good is because Vex and Varus are both Executioners. And Executioner is basically like a jewel gauntlet on your units. And so you already have a jewel gauntlet. You don't need to stack a second one on it. You can complement it by giving another crit combo item like Guardbreaker. But if you have Giant Slayer or Deathcap, even in Archangels, which is kind of hard because you need another tier for that, but you can just play that on Vex, and that's also totally fine. So the third item is pretty flex. Varus holds utility really well, so Red Buff and Shiv are ideal, but Varus oftentimes just holds the other Exotech item as well as like a Shojin. Maybe you get like another AP item. Maybe you get like a Giant Slayer number 2. That just all goes on Varus because you do need a second damage dealer. Mordekaiser is actually one of the more important tanks in this composition as well because you're much more likely to hit more 2 than Sejuani 2 in the current meta. You can roll on 8 for a long time, and you might never hit Sejuani because there's just so many Exotech players, or even just like a Cypher player, right? A Cypher player might just cash out. They're not even trying to play around Exotech. They just pick up Sejuani and Zeri, and they hold all your units. But this level 8 board is very, very stable. And then on 9, you can add Aurora. And then ideally, you end up dropping Jax and Jhin for Renekton and Viego. That's how you cap the board the highest. But you can also play Zac 2. You can also play Garen. Garen can just mod your front line or give Vex something really nice like, maybe a Techie or Dynamo. Don't cut Morgana. I think a lot of people feel like Morgana is really expendable, but the reality is Morgana gives you team-wide buffs and specifically gives Vex 20 AP, which gives her 20% more damage, and that's really, really huge. Other really powerful augments besides generic econ ones to consider, Board of Directors is also an insane augment in this composition. It just gives Vex a ton of value. It's almost like you're playing 4 Executioners and like 5 Divinicore in terms of its power. So you just get so much bonus stats. Sated Spellweaver is also really, really good in this composition because it has really good synergy with the Omnivamp of Vex. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And then early game item holder tends to be Morgana. You can play Morgana in a bunch of different cores. You can put Morgana and Gragas with Bruisers. You can play Morgana in this Exotech package, for example. You can also just play Techies. You don't have to play Morgana, but You have to keep in mind that Gunblade is a little bit of a weak item early game because it doesn't really do very much until mid to late game. Vex is actually not very good with artifacts. Usually in this section we have like artifact recommendations. Vex is actually not very good with it. You'd rather play artifacts on other units, but she is very, very good with Radiant items. And if you do get a Radiant item, go for Radiant Gunblade. That is the best one for Vex for sure. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our featured POV to see just exactly how it's done. Let's hop on board with Souless' POV. Souless is a top challenger player from North America. Going back to set 1, he's one of the true OGs, was formerly on TSM, has won multiple tournaments, and is currently in love with Vexotech. He likes playing this comp a lot, and Souless is actually kind of a notorious player that likes spamming compositions to top challenger if he really finds a lot of success with it. This portal is Scuttle Puddle, so you're going to have more resources than usual, which is one of the conditions that we talked about of how to play this composition. You need to have a lot of resources and ways to get to that Vex board easily, but also get away to the 5 costs. He starts out with an early tier, so that's going to be very key to figure out if he can actually angle for it, and he gets dropped a rod. So already, he should be thinking about this composition because he has 2 of the 4 components that are core to it. He's actually going to sell everything to make 10 gold as well, and that's how economically minded he is at the moment, trying to see if he can make early gold so that way he can gear it for a fast 8 and have a ton of resources to roll for that Vex 2. I personally probably would have held on to Vi just for the possibility of playing into Cypher in the mid game, but I think this is totally fine as well, just playing around early techies. Techies are really good AP item holders, especially if he's going to be slamming something like Gunblade early on. Let's take a look at his early augments and see if there's anything that appeals to us here. This first augment in spare parts is really good for Nitro comps. If you're playing either Nitro reroll or you're trying to play Nitro as a way to level and play for a 4 cost, it's Tempo Nitro, you could take spare parts, but it doesn't really apply to our composition, mainly because Vex doesn't have many ways that conveniently feeds into Nitro. Vex's main traits are Divinicore and Executioner, and neither of them really play well into a lot of the traits of Nitro units. You could technically connect them, like you could play spare parts with Elise. Elise is a dynamo that connects to Morgana, and Morgana connects to Vex, but you still don't have Executioner. So you kind of notice that's a little bit out of the way. In the future, if they buff Nitro again to be good for 2-star 4 cost tempo lines, you probably could take spare parts, but for now, it's probably a skip. Alter Ego Ross is actually a very good hero augment. We rate it as one of the best on TFT Academy. It's also a Divinicore unit, so you could theoretically say, well, I'm just going to play around Divinicore with Vex and find a way to tie it in there. The only issue is that with Ross, you really want to go for a 3-star. In order to do that, you have to roll at 6. That's not the maximum odds to hit Vex, and so there's a conflict of synergy there. And then also, you have to go for Rost items to start off with, which means that you're less likely to get the ideal items for Vex. And so even though theoretically Rost as a Divinicore unit could fit in the composition, it's not something that you're going to go for here. Healing Orbs is actually a pretty solid combat augment. It just gives you a lot of burst healing, and it's very, very good for melee units in particular, like Rengar or Zed or anybody else that really gets into the fray. Not really useful for us here in the early game, so I think we should skip that, but in the future, you might want to take a good combat augment for Healing Orbs if you're in the later stages of the game. We roll the first option, and it is Syndicate Crest, gain a Syndicate emblem. That doesn't apply to our composition, so that's an easy skip. We roll it again, and we see a Marksman Crest. Doesn't really fit any of our items. The top marksman that you're thinking about are Xayah and Aphelios. Doesn't really apply to any of these items because we don't have swords, we don't have bows. We have a lot of AP items, so Marksman doesn't really make much sense. And he does want to pick, by the way, something trait related because this gives 2 extra gold. So if it is something powerful that he can lean into, he would prefer to pick it. He rolls again and he sees Anima Squad Crest, and he doesn't have any Anima Squad early. And even though he could theoretically play a lot of these items in Anima Squad, the reality is you can't activate Anima Squad early. Even if he could, he doesn't have 2 stars. And Anima is a trait that thrives off of win streaking and being ahead. So I think that it's a no pick. This is sort of the downside of selling your early game stage 1 board. If you sell your stage 1 board, you are very likely to have a weak stage 2 board, which means that if you're trying to play for like these tempo win streak, vertical lines like Anima Squad, for example, you just won't really have the units to do it. So it's very rare that you want to take something like Anima Squad Crest after you chose to commit to making gold early in the game. So that means we're probably going to pick options 2 or 3, but I don't like either of them. Let's go ahead and roll them and see what happens. He rolls option 2, and he gets Epoch. I think the Epoch is acceptable here. It is less important on portals like Scuttle Puddle that give you so much extra gold and resources to pick an Econ augment to start things off. but it's never bad. It's just okay. So you could think about Epoch. It's a safe pick. He rolls option 3 and he gets 2 trick, gain a random 2-star 2 cost and 2 random 2-star 1 cost champions, which gives him an early game to actually play off of. And that's actually kind of important to consider because Epoch could give you the EXP and rolls, but if he gets 2 trick, he gets power and he gets the ability to win rounds, which might be worth gold. Epoch is 4 EXP and 2 free rerolls, which is somewhere between 8 to 12 gold, depending on the value of when you use your rolls. We can go ahead and say it's just like 10 gold. And then 2 trick gives you a random 2-star 2 cost, which is 5 to 6 gold. And then you get 2 2-star 1 cost champions. So that's about the same thing, 10 to 12 gold, depending on what you get. The reason why I say 5 to 6 is because sometimes the 2-star 2 cost is completely useless. You just sell it, it's worth 5. But you play it, and then you are able to win some fights as it can be worth 6. So you have actually equivocal gold value, but 2 trick also gives you the opportunity to win streak or even itemize. And it's really important because 2 trick is better than usual since we have items that we could potentially make. And so I think 2 trick here ends up probably being the slightly better pick than Epoch, although I probably would say that they're around the same. All right, he chooses to go for 2 trick, and he gets a Poppy 2, a Mundo 2, and a Neferi 2. Neferi, unfortunately, has no Exotech to link to at the moment, but we can still just play Amp. And he's going to slam an item on Neferi 2, and this is a really important concept, which is to slam items on your best units in the early game, even if it's like kind of awkward. I don't think anyone here thinks that Neferi's best item is Guardbreaker or anything close to it, but Neferi is the best damage dealer, and Guardbreaker just amplifies the damage of whoever is holding the item. And so he's just going to put Guardbreaker on Neferi, and then eventually find a way to get those items onto Vex later on. And I think this is really smart. I think a lot of people would think about, oh, I'll just slam Guardbreaker on a backline unit. So if they're playing, for example, Vhagar, and they're playing Techies, they would say, oh, I have Cyberboss, with 2-star Poppy. I would probably activate this Techie because Guardbreaker traditionally makes more sense on a Vhagar. Instead, he's putting it on his Neferi because Neferi is the best upgraded unit. It does help that he hit Exotech this turn, so he can get Exotech in. He's also putting the Flux Capacitor onto the Jhin. Flux Capacitor is better on Jhin. It's arguable, again, of whether or not he should put that onto Neferi, but he basically is, able to win either way, so it's not that big of a deal. And you notice that he's also aggressively making gold, right? Let's rewind to see. You see how he's like very aggressively selling his bench, trying to make these intervals. So he's trying to have the best of both worlds. In a lot of scenarios, you see people win streak, but they hold a bench that's pretty expensive, and that kind of negates the benefit of winning. You get a gold for winning, but you also lose a gold for not making interest thresholds, so it's sort of net neutral. The ideal scenario, which is what Souless is doing, and by the way, he does move the item to Neferi. I think this is better. He ends up getting the best of both worlds, which is win streaking and being able to make interest. So that ends up being a really powerful spot to be in. So if Souless can convert this into a 5 streak, his spot is that much better. And these are the small things of what challenger players do better than even grandmasters and masters players who are just one division lower than them technically, is that they're always finding ways to squeeze out extra gold, which can lead to more future gold opportunities. On this carousel, he gets nothing optimal for Vex. He doesn't have a sword or a tier, so he's just going to take an extra rod. And that's because he can play off his other component here with the cloak. He can make a Ionic Spark if he wants. So that way he's playing around Vex because he knows inevitably, it's not important now, but he's going to need magic resistance shred at a certain point because that is going to be part of what unlocks Vex's true damage in the late stage of the game. All right, so we're going up against a level 5 board with Vayne, Rageblade, i.e. that person is hard committed to Slayers, does have the lethal rerouting, so he knows that some people are rerolling, and these are some powerful comps being played. He might actually lose this fight, and this is mainly because he doesn't have optimal items on correct champions. So kind of unfortunate. This is sort of like, the reason why playing Neferi 2 is not ideal. A lot of people don't like putting items on Neferi because he just lost with an upgraded board against, a Vayne 1. Kind of sucks in that situation. But I don't think that means that his play was wrong. This is actually an interesting spot. He can choose to hold Zed and Galio at the cost of Econ and try to play a little bit of Cypher. I don't think he is going to do that, but this is something you could think about if you were in a much worse position. If you didn't have Neferi 2 and Poppy 2, I think you would definitely hold things like the Cypher and consider looking for one Vi, one LeBlanc, and maybe a Draven, just lose streak on stage 3 and get all your resources. And just playing Cypher for one stage plus one round of cash out would be good enough to justify having all those extra resources to hit your board. But I think in this spot, I think, yeah, I would hold and skip. You can see him hover over this to think about like if he wants to play it as an improved board state, but he did deliberate whether or not it'd be worth it. He's going up against a Golden Ox board, so another person playing another AP line, but thankfully that person is not going to be contesting Vex. They don't have any tiers though, so if Souls doesn't get a tier drop here, that person with Nashers is clearly angling for Annie, so they're going to take all our tiers. So it might be a situation where our tiers are contested. On Carousel Drop, we do get another tier, so that's fortunate for us. And we get a Golden Orb that has Zeri and a Nico. That's really interesting. So we could actually play Zeri in the mid game. And it's funny because this is normally like an insane high roll for a lot of Exotech comps, but we're not actually like trying to even angle for Zeri as our primary carry. And our items end up really nice. We got dropped one sword and one tier. And, you know, it was likely that we were able to make one of them, but this is a really fortunate item situation here for Souless, which now means that for win streaking purposes, he doesn't really care that much about Carousel, and he can commit the full tempo because he has basically the best Vex item setup already. And this is why it's important to try and play the build when you have good item start for it, because you're just much more likely to, you know, quote, be lucky. Like, because he was angling for Vex with a tier and a rod already, if he got dropped one or two components, his items look really good. If you're trying to force Vex from a spot where you don't have those components, let's say you have gloves and bows, it's just going to feel really awkward throughout the most of the game. Take a look at his 3-2 augments: Preparation, Demify, and Climb the Ladder. Preparation is actually quite a good combat augment for silver. It just gives you a lot of stats relative to other silvers. The downside of Preparation is it's a very complicated augment to play because you have to play your strong units on your bench and you have to like play a compensating board for it. That ends up taxing your economy because you have to hold both a full bench and also field the board. That's semi-competitive unless you're lose streaking. So Preparation is like an expensive, complicated, easy to mess up augment. So a lot of people stay away from it. I personally think it's actually quite good though for a silver. So if you choose to play for it, it's because he feels confident in it. And he also has the HP to trade. You know, he could trade some HP here for some power later in the game. Because it's Scuttle Puddle, you do want to take combat augments because there's just a lot of people that are going to cap boards really high because they have so many resources. And if everybody hits in a high resource encounter and portal, that just means that combat augments are often going to be what differentiates you. So this is actually a tip for anybody that is struggling right now in late stage of the game. If you are losing late game situations consistently despite hitting your board, chances are it's because they have combat augments and they're positioning better than you. Demify's not a bad pick. We do have a lot of HP on the board because it takes the combined health of the units on board. Exotech has a lot of HP thanks to slammed items, so he could take Demify. The problem with that is he is unlikely to win fights on stage 3. And a lot of times with Demify, you want to take it when you think you can actually win fights on stage 3 because you have like good items to help play off of a good front line. Like Demify is really good when you have like Rage Blade in the back, for example, because the dummy stalls for a long time. Units with Rage Blade will get a bunch of stacks. And so if you're playing like, let's say an Aphelios or Zeri Rage Blade line, Demify makes a lot of sense because the dummy with, you know, 7,000 HP, 8,000 HP will stall long enough for you to get ramping. We don't really have that. We have Gunblade and Blue Buff, and that's something that scales off of how strong your units are. Gunblade's only going to heal as much as your ability does damage. If we're playing 1-star units, if we take Demify and then we play all 1-star units, and then we have Blue Buff Gunblade on a 1-star unit, we're not actually going to heal our dummy very much or deal much damage. So this is a spot where Demify is actually a lot weaker than usual. But I do think that in general, this augment is quite good if you are playing any of those like Rage Blade scaling compositions. Climb the Ladder is for verticals. It's really good for compositions that also like using a lot of flat stats. So it's like perfect for Anima Squad, for example. But it's not really that good for Vex when you want to play kind of wide traits and you play a few Divinate Core, like 2 Executioner. It's not really buffing her that much. And the more you splash other types of traits like 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, the less good Climb the Ladder is. Okay, so after a really long-winded explanation, we roll all of these. Big Friend 1 is a pretty solid silver augment. It just gives basically 7% more HP to your front line. And it's really good for compositions that are already very tanky. It's really good for like 6 bruisers, for example. If you play bruisers fiddlesticks, just makes everyone really tanky, and it has really good synergy with HP. So, Big Friend is good for that. The downside is that you're forced to clump, and so positioning is going to be a lot more awkward, but that might not be that big of a deal. We'll see. Lunch money is actually literally bugged right now. I don't know why it hasn't been fixed yet. Probably just because it's in the next backs of Fitches, but lunch money works quite literally, which is you have to deal 8 damage in a round to get 2 gold. Before it used to tally. And so you could get rolling value, like you deal 6 this round, you deal 4 next round. That's technically 10. Oh, time to give you cash out. That doesn't actually work. So lunch money, I think, is actually not working as intended. Stay away. And then finally, bulky buddies. This is basically Big Friend, but a little bit easier to position around because you're just getting a max HP shield. All right, so Souless takes bulky buddies, and he levels to 7 because this is pretty cheap for him to actually level to 7. He's only losing 1 gold of interest, and if he wins because he leveled to 7, he's making that gold as if he is at 50 gold. So this is actually a really good situation to recognize that he's so rich that he can push levels even more aggressively. So this is how you leverage your gold lead when you're able to play win streak like this, and why so many good players like to play from a spot like this. Fun thing to know is that he's positioning Zeri in the 3rd row. The quick summary of that is Zeri will always dash to safety, and so by leaving more spots in the back line, she'll be able to navigate more easily. Amongst her back line, she ends up finding a Vex as well, so a pretty high roll spot here for Souless to start things off. He's not playing the Vex immediately, though, and I actually kind of like him holding it here because I don't think it's necessarily better because he would be taking apart 5 Exotech. And that 5 Exotech is kind of important because Nefiri and Zeri arguably do a lot of damage comparable to Vex because it's just Vex 1 and you lose like a full Exotech item as well. So it's like kind of arguable. And I like that he's not messing with success. He's winning so far, and it looks like he should win this next fight as well. And so Souless' spot is looking real good with his early Vex. He has the Exotech core. Everything is good to go. His items are really solid. There's a Vex on the carousel. And it looks like he might even get Vex. Wait, no one's taking Vex? Seriously? Oh, someone tried to take it from him, but I think he got the rod. So, man, now he has Vex pair. Is he going to transition now? Finds the Mordekaiser. He could start to put together the board, right? Mordekaiser with Varus Vex and Morgana, but it's a lot of 1-stars, and he'd be downgrading, right? He'd be putting Nefiri 2 out. He'd be putting like Poppy 2 out to try and get like this board going. So he's just gonna hold here, and again, not messing with success, playing around his 2-stars. Very good fundamentals, right? Just like playing around his itemized 2-star units. If he had Gragas, to activate Divinicore, the Bruiser for the Mordekaiser. If he had like a 2-star Varus, I could see him try to transition immediately, but he's not sure. So he chooses to hold and see if he can continue this win streak. Now that he lost, he might be willing to sell, and he also upgraded this Jax. He can consider moving the items now if he wants to. Like a lot of times what other players doing if they're not sure is that they just simply say, okay, I'm going to ride this until I lose, and then I'll change. But no, it looks like he's going to keep it here for now and just ride this wave for one more turn. Okay, it looks like we're going to grab a pretty close win over the Golden Nox player. And I think because it looks like he is contested on the Exotech line, he should level here and roll some. I think another thing about playing these contested like Exotech lines is if you have the economy, play ahead and try to roll before other people do, because they're going to try to also roll the next turn, level 8, and take your units. It also like gets APM out of the way, so you can see that he's like trying to equip his items. You're also going to get some gold back for the round, so I do like doing some of these actions now because there's just an overload of decisions on the next turn. He's on Vex pair, so I think he's going to roll until he hits Vex 2 and a Sejuani preferably. He finds 1 Sejuani. Oh, wow. He's actually rolling. Okay, he rolled like a lot of gold to find this Vex 2, which is kind of unfortunate. I think he was actually pretty likely to hit Vex 2 quickly, but at least he hit the board, so it's a pretty big investment. He can econ up to 30 actually pretty fast. I do like that he put his items onto a Mordekaiser too. I think one thing that people would default to would be put items onto Sejuani 1, But Mordekaiser 2 is actually a better tank than Sejuani 1 is, because on average, a upgraded 3-cost unit should be better than a unupgraded 4-cost unit in terms of tank value. That's generally the case. There are exceptions to it, but I think that's just good fundamentals. Glass Cannon, Moonlight, and Long Distance Pals. Glass Cannon is actually something that does not work well with Vex's damage, because Vex wants to be at full health for her passive for the overheal. So the fact that she's at 90 HP actually is actively working against her damage. You do get damage amp, but it kind of works a little bit in opposing direction, so I don't think it's good here. Moonlight doesn't really have much application. We can only pretty much upgrade Morgana or Jax, and that doesn't sound particularly really good. I mean, you could theoretically play Moonlight Morgana, but it's not actually that good right now. Maybe later in the set when they buff it. Long Distance Pals kind of grieves our positioning. I'm not that big a fan of Long Distance Pals, because you have to put Vex in the corner, and that might mess her shooting into the clump. It's kind of important, as we talked about, with her positioning, being able to hit clumps of frontline. If you put her on the side, she's going to lose a little bit of that value, even though she gets some bonus stats. And then you combine that with the fact that who's going to be Vex's pal is going to be Varus. I mean, I guess that's okay. Nothing amazing here. So I'm not a huge fan of any of these right now. Oh, wow. He rolls option 2 and he gets trial run, getting the Exotech Golem with a copy of each Exotech items. Right now, he has Flux Capacitor and he has Chassis. Those are pretty solid ones. And also, he has Bulky Buddies. So if he gets to level 9, that Golem will also count towards Bulky Buddies, so you can get additional extension of his augment value. So there's a lot of things to like about it. It also is just kind of what Vex needs, which is just more frontline. To help her stall, so that way she can get her overheal bonus stacking consecutively. He rolls options 1 and 3. Duo Q just kind of does a lot more of what the encounter's already doing, just giving you champions, giving you items. His items are actually really good. And while he's playing Exotech and you could always use more item augments, I think Duo Q isn't that important, because he's not looking for a 5-cost to truly unlock his power. You could take Duo Q and get things like Renekton, Viego, and Aurora, and it's really good. It also could just be another Urgot that he just sold, or a Samira, which is completely useless. So I think that the risk doesn't really match the reward here. Mace's Will is also okay. I guess if he was lacking a third item on Vex, like you would take Mace's Will here if it completed Guard Breaker, for example, for Vex. It doesn't do anything right now with just the glove. And the attack speed and crit chance is really nice for Vex in particular, but it's just not as good as Trial Run, I think, here. Oh, interesting. You take Mace's Will. Okay. Does he have plans for this glove? I mean, it could be that he just takes it for the crit strike chance. But this is actually a little bit unconventional. So he might be fishing for something in particular. No, he's just going to go Thief's Gloves. Okay, let's see if this works out. Because I thought that the Trial Run Golem would be a lot more value. It could be the fact that he's not planning to play 7 Exotech, so he's losing some value on the Golem, which would make sense. Also, I don't know what his 7 Exotech Golem actually is, so I don't know if the item ends up being worth it. If it's an offensive item that he can't use, let's say it's like Pulse Stabilizer, that's not really good for the Golem, versus if he had like something like Cyber Coil. So I think I can totally see like maybe why he's choosing that. I think that it's an interesting choice. And by the way, Souless actually is positioning Vex in the corner, trying to keep her safe. This is sort of the song and dance that we mentioned with that Vex kind of struggles with, because on the one hand, you want her to be in the safest spot on the board possible so that she can overheal. On the other, she's not shooting into a big clump of frontline units. I think what's happening right now is that he hit Vex 2 pretty fast, like in terms of just when he did early in stage 4. And he knows that a lot of teams aren't prepared to deal with it. The one thing I will say is I don't like where his position is with the Mordekaiser relative to the Vex. Like he has the Spark not on the same side as Vex. And as a result, the radius of the shred is right here, like to the edge of Sejuani. And that's not where Vex is. So I would say that this is totally fine as long as his Spark moves to the other side. But I guess against fights like this, it doesn't really make a difference because he's shredding the whole team anyways. And everyone's clumping around the Mordekaiser. Dang, just look at how much damage Vex is doing. Look at all that true damage chunk and everything. And now he's win streaking. He's fully clear to go to 9. And this is already, by all means, like very likely for him to top 4. So I think he's in a spot where he can play for a top 2 or even a win. That's how far ahead he is right now. And you know what? I think because you're only playing 2 Executioner, the Mace's Will should end up getting Vex to very close to 100% crit chance. So I think ultimately that's what he's angling for, and just says, you know what, it's just like the glove is fine for the individual value, but the crit chance is what's really good. And I could really see the crits paying off. So I stand corrected. I see where the Mace's wheel value is, and it looks really, really good. Okay, he hits the Gragas too. And by the way, he did switch the Mordekaiser over, and also you're seeing the value of Mordekaiser as your tank. So this is all really good stuff. All right, basically no item drops because all of them were front loaded. So he only has one single anvil. He can complete a Giant Slayer here for the Varus. You want to go 3 items Varus. Varus is your duo carry. And he levels for an Urgot. This Urgot isn't actually his final board. It's just a unit he can play as his next in. And it looks like he even wants to take a look at level 10. This is actually a really greedy play because a lot of people would roll here to try and get like some of the 5 costs. But I think Souless has recognized that the rest of the lobby is not actually strong enough to compete with him. And so he stops here at 42. I think if he took a bad loss, he'd be thinking about rolling at 9. But because he's so far ahead and he's staying on a win streak, he's at 83 HP. Even if he loses 2 more fights now that he won the previous one, he could get to level 10 and still have, 40, 50 HP to play with at level 10. And he can skip 9 entirely and then cap really, really far high. And this is actually like probably a really good summary of what makes this set kind of hard for some players to deal with. Like these players who are fighting in this 3, 4, 5, 6 range, they probably have pretty solid boards. We just saw like a Syra boss, Vagar reroll 3, look fine. We're going up against like players that have 6 Golden Knocks of Philios with Garen 2 and Viego and Annie 2. There was like a Slayer's Vein 3 board. Like everyone kind of has like the guide recommended boards, but Souless recognizes that he's far ahead in his tempo, and he's going to leverage that by trading his HP here to get to the next level. And by getting to level 10, he should cap higher than everyone. I think the funny thing on top of that, he's trading his HP, but he's just win streaking because his comp is so far ahead. And he's going up against kind of a weaker composition, really beating up on someone like rerolling on Amp. That person is a little bit weaker right now, so getting a free win there. Okay, wants to go for redemption, but missed. I think he's just looking for another Sejuani item. And he hit Zac 2, and now I guess he has to decide if he wants to stack Sejuani or Zac 2. I think that Zac doesn't have many stacks yet, so I could actually see a world where he's supposed to play around the Sejuani for now. There's a Rengar player in the lobby, so he's a little bit scared about whether or not his backline can get jumped on, but it should be fine. This Zed is actually positioned pretty well because Vex, when she has lost some HP, loses a pretty big amount of DPS. But I think we're just so far ahead because now we're at level 9 and we're hitting 2-star legendaries, and we are just absolutely crushing this Slayer player who's at like level 8, 0 gold. And so now I'm pretty sure Souless, because he win-streaked everything here, he's clear to go to level 10. He can trade this next fight, and he's going to go to 10, roll for 2-star 5 cost, and that'll be the game. Someone in his Souless chat is like, I just don't understand why Vex rails the Vayne board so hard. Is it part of it is just because they're clumping the front line? She's dealing true damage. She does it really quickly. And other compositions are feeding into Vex's game plan, which is to stall out and just deal a bunch of true damage, and you don't have backline access. But look at what happened. This is a composition where it melted the front line fast enough where Vex couldn't sustain it through the heal, and then you can focus down the Vex. So the way you actually get past this Vex board is just to burst their front line fast enough before Vex can actually heal. If you stall out and hope that you can outvalue them over time, you're gonna be in for a world of pain, especially if you're playing a clumped front line. Bramble Declaw and Spark, we transition items from Mord 2 to Zac 2. That also makes sense. Mord 2 has done his job admirably. He has tanked for a long time. And now we're just going to play for 2-star legendaries. I think ultimately you still want Viego. You can also think about cutting down the number of Exotechs here, because as soon as you find Renekton, you don't really need Jax. The only reason to play 5 Exotech is for item HP value, so you have more HP on your front line like Sejuani for having items, or for the Exotech item itself. And the Exotech item itself is not super valuable. It's just a chassis, and you could replace it with another tank item. So Jax comes out, Viego goes in, Aurora goes in. This is the capped board state. And he's not going to try to play this Urgot 2. He's actually going to pull it in. And because he's rolling at 10, his odds are so good. He hit everything. And that should be the game. I mean, Souless is in such a dominant spot. I'd be so surprised if he ends up losing this game. It's funny that he still doesn't even have Sejuani 2, by the way. The Slayer board actually is making it kind of close. Oh, that Slayer board got to level 8, and I believe they finished itemizing things like their Senna, so that reward board has got online. So actually, you know what? I called it a little bit early. Interesting to note that he's not eating anything with the Renekton on the Overlord bonus, and that's because Renekton, well, one, he didn't have a lot of items, but two, there wasn't really like many good targets to do so. Now it looks like he's gonna go ahead and bite the Morgana, but just, don't bite any unit of high value here. Part of what makes it awkward is you can see the Gunblade. The Gunblade was actually healing Morgana as well because she's the lowest HP unit. So biting can be a little bit troll in this composition. But if you do have Renekton 2 and you have items for him, definitely go for the Overlord bite. All right, and finally we hit Sejuani 2, Aurora 2. We move items over from Varus. Very sound. He has all these removers ready to go. 2-star Sejuani, 2-star Zag, 2-star Vex, 2-star Aurora. And we're queuing up what should be the last fight of the game. Very stacked Slayer board, right? They have combat augments, plural. They have 3 items on everyone except for a Senna 3. But, able to outcap it very firmly and win convincingly. A very, very solid first with Vexotech. So that's the Vexotech comp in a nutshell. It's surprisingly very good. And if you can get the right items on Vex, you have to have Biss. It can do some amazing wonders. And you do have some flexibility. You don't have to just play into the 5 Vexotech every single time. You can cap higher and higher with the legendaries and eventually win the game if you are far enough ahead. And Souless showed you that you don't have to just play like a lose streak for the perfect items. You can play for win streak if you have a good spot for it and the stars align with your items. You should be able to carry that momentum all the way to a first place. So have fun spamming this composition on ladder. It's very fun. I'm definitely having a lot of good time with it. Let me know what you guys think about the comp in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.